Welcome to Design Thinking Games, a fantasy and user experience podcast. Each episode, your podcast hosts, Tim Broadwater and Michael Schofield, will examine the player experience of board games, pen and paper role-playing games, live-action games, mobile games, and video games. You can find every episode, including this one, on your podcatcher of choice and on the web at designthinkinggames.com.
Something we talked about for this episode was we had secret things we were going to find out apart from each other, or like select and then make each other aware, like in this podcast.
Correct. Yeah, so let me set the stage a little bit. Let me know if I'm wrong, but I think this is a relatively common model that folks learn. There's not exactly UX 101 commonly, or maybe that's more of a thing now, but this feels like it would belong in that kind of introduction to UX tutorial or workflow. And that is a model called the UX Honeycomb, which I believe was first introduced by Peter Morville.
Yeah. I believe he's actually like you. He has a degree in library science, right? And
I think so.
He started, I think, Semantic Studios, and I think his background is essentially in information architecture, discoverability, findability, and then my understanding of it, and this is just recollection, is that he made an information architecture, or IA circle, or concentric circles for context, content, and users. And I believe that was in the 90s. And then essentially that eventually became the UX Honeycomb, which I think is more around 2004. And that's the one that if you just Google UX Honeycomb, it's the one that's usable, useful, desirable, accessible, credible, findable, valuable, right?
Right. It's definitely the main one. And what it is it's supposed to look like the inside of a honeycomb, where you often see models with these concentric circles, Venn diagrams, etc. In this case, yeah, effectively that, like when it comes to UX, like it is a net positive. All ships rise and lower with the tide. And it's not simply, I think one of its primary goals was to sort of disassociate or decouple this UX equals look and feel and aesthetics notion that I think a lot of folks have, and that in fact a lot of job descriptions in the wild have right now, where they're looking for UX people, but what they're really looking for are graphic designers. This honeycomb kind of helps show that, well, gosh, the user experience is made up of a whole bunch of things that aren't look and feel. And in fact, you can invest heavily in these non-aesthetic qualities, like the credibility of a thing or the findability of a thing, and not invest so much in the user interface itself and still come away with a net positive experience. Super helpful. Yeah, it's a super helpful model. It's one that like I totally used to, like in design committees of yore, right, to make a point. And it's liberating too. It helps kind of distinguish the graphic designer from the UX designer. They're different things.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think I've used it because I think it helps with priorities, right? Everyone's always asking for what you're saying, which is like the polish, the razzle-dazzle, the UI. But the other pieces that are there are, are we being accessible? Is this something that is even valuable? Valuable being the center, but is this credible, the perception of it to our users? Like, do they even desire to use this? And do they know how to use it? And I think from that, we're talking about your UX Honeycomb. Can you give us a little history of that? Because I think you took it and then kind of altered it a little bit years ago, right?
Yeah. Back in the library days. I think back in the days when you and I did maybe our first webinar together around then. So let's backtrack. So for our audio listeners who aren't looking to anything, there are traditionally 6 facets, 6 little combs in the UX honeycomb, in no particular order, because I'm doing this from memory. They are desirability, which I think describes sort of the look, feel, the aesthetics, the funness, maybe the gimmickiness, like how desirable a thing is. It's accessibility. Boy, that's a really hard one to kind of like boil down.
Well, mainly, I take that more as like inclusivity.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
As people need peripheral devices, or if they have different visual acuities or disabilities, that piece of that honeycomb, I think, describes that.
It's the answer to the question: can you access or utilize this service across multiple devices? But that's accessibility. The findability and discoverability, the ease of which that the information within the service, or even information about the service itself, can be discovered through search, filter, information architecture. Credibility, how much trust a user has in the service, and more specifically, the people behind the service. I think traditionally useful is its own honeycomb.
It is, and it's right next to usable.
Usable being literally, can you use it? Does the button depress? Like, is it? It's the spectrum of ease of use, whether it is easy or not. But that usability is a factor. So with that in mind, yeah, I made a honeycomb to a different honeycomb built on top of this. Frankly, because after a couple of webinars trying to explain the honeycomb to our colleagues in higher education, there were just some like questions and confusion around aspects like usefulness that I just wanted to clear up. But also, it was at that time, and I don't think that time has passed. It's still super relevant now, where people were considering more. They were asking questions more like, gosh, like what role does privacy, user privacy, or ethics, eco-friendliness, etc., have in the honeycomb? So in this LibUX honeycomb, library user experience honeycomb that I made, I did a couple of things. One, I conflated, or I guess I abstracted useful into and usable into a little bit of a triumvirate. That there's this was based off Nielsen Norman Group's definition of usability, and so there's usability, which is specifically like its learnability, its ease of use. There's utility. For instance, something can be very easy to use, but if it has no practical utility, like in the real world, that has some impact. And usefulness is sort of a cumulative of those two. A thing is useful if it both has utility and is usable. And then the only other thing I did was add ethical to it, because Peter Morville makes the point himself that it's a honeycomb because you can mix, mingle, and add as many different facets of the user experience as you want. The problem with concentric circles is that it's it's kind of finite, right? Like you can't add too many to it.
Yeah, I actually like your honeycomb. I think useful kind of being a combination of utility and usable makes sense, and adding ethical to it. And I also think we can put this up in the a picture or a link to it up in the show notes, but you have valuable as being the total output of those things. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yeah. Again, it's just that the analogy that ships rise with the tide. So the value increases in total, or decreases. If you don't invest in any of these things, it goes way down.
Okay. Yeah. So using your honeycomb, we challenged each other to find a game, tabletop, video game, live action, board game, whatever, that each other, or like we ourselves, thought best represented like an embodiment of this value, of this UX honeycomb, right? Or just your UX honeycomb. Are you ready to reveal what you chose and what I chose?
Yeah. I'm curious which one you would start with.
Should I start, or do you want to start?
I almost feel like I wish we had the physical representation of the honeycomb so we could spin it and pick one of the
let's
facets.
Start maybe with the game. So for me, I chose, and this is because it's also on my mind right now, and I'm playing the crap out of it. Dead by Daylight.
Oh yes.
So I chose that. It's an asymmetrical survival horror game. Essentially, it's on every platform. It's been out since 2016, so it's like 7 years in development at this point.
Wow, I remember when it came out. I can't believe it's been 7 years now. And it still
is,
it
and
still
they
looks
keep adding
great
chapter.
too. Yeah.
It is amazing. I love it, and we've talked before, and you know that I'm a huge fan of asymmetrical survival horror, and I'm a huge fan of MOBAs, which are like these massive online battle arenas. And so games like Monster Hunter, Friday the 13th, Predator Hunting Grounds, like those games really speak to me because you basically customize your character how you want them to look, and then you give them perks or experience or whatever, and then essentially you go into like a timed battle, and depending on what it is, you know, you're surviving or trying to meet an objective or you're trying to survive, but the asymmetrical survival piece of it is that with Dead by Daylight, similar to Predator Hunting Grounds and Friday the 13th, 5 players go in, one of them is a killer or a monster, and the other 4 are trying to survive. And so by surviving, you have to repair, you're kind of trapped in this arena, and you have to repair these specific engines, 5 of them, to unlock the gate so you can survive. And the whole time you're hiding from this killer or monster, and who is going to pretty much like capture you, injure you, hang you on a hook, kill you, like any it's as brutal as possible, right? But yeah, that's Dead by Daylight, and I think that really to me represents like this great usability, great development, and meets a lot of these honeycomb pieces. What about you?
So I thought more in like extremes, and what I ended up with were a number of examples that I think fail in certain parts of the honeycomb and are great in the others. But I think overall is one of my favorite games of the decade, man. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which was one of the things I wanted to talk big about Senua's Sacrifice in terms of the honeycomb here is in 2 parts. One, just in terms of its usability, its ease of use, and the way that that Senua, or the way that they teach you to play through listening to aural AURAL cues. One of the big things that Senua's Sacrifice did was give you this kind of like 360 degree audio experience. The other extreme of this honeycomb, like just its accessibility or its inclusivity, maybe, if we're interpreting accessibility here, and basically creating a character who is neural divergent, right? Like whether or not, like she hears voices, whether or not these are the spirits of her ancestors or not is left up to the user. But these voices teach you how to play the game.
What's the game about for those who've not played it before? Maybe not unfamiliar with it.
Senua is a 6th century Celt, maybe. I think our people are resisting either like Anglo-Saxon or Norse invasion, right? And so basically, you play as Senua. She's treated kind of like a witch, right?
Okay.
And yeah, because she's a seer, she has visions. She speaks to those who are imperceivable. And la-di-da-di-da. So like your entire people have been like totally oppressed, and Senua seeks vengeance, right? Someone has been taken from her and she goes after them. And it is a descent into questionably madness, or a spiritual realm where the spirits and the deities of like the old Norse have actually interwoven themselves in the world, and you fight these creatures, these gods, and their spawn. Or perhaps that's purely how you perceive them, and what you've been engaged in all this time is the slaughter of an enemy tribe.
Oh my gosh, it's a little crazy. Yeah, I've never played it, and I've heard really good things about it. And I know it got a lot of rave reviews. Like a lot of people, it's ranked. I believe it's rated pretty high. So then, like looking at the honeycomb, then or your honeycomb per se, I think we can both say like desirable. Like people would play the game because it's fun, right? And so if Senua's Sacrifice has like a 9 out of 10 rating on Steam and a 95% Google like ratio, which is I'm seeing it does. I mean, obviously it's fun, and Dead by Daylight literally has been out for 7 years and has a huge player base, and tons of people still play it on mobile phone and on Switch and PlayStation, Steam, Xbox, whatever. So we could probably skip that one, I'm assuming. Speaking a little bit more to Dead by Daylight, concerning accessibility, and this is going to be a tangent a little bit, but we're now in 10 years solidly, or 20 years solidly into the 21st century. If you're making a game and you're not letting people turn on and turn off Rumble on the remote, or you're not letting people invert their y-axis or add subtitles, you're doing something wrong. And one of the games that I noticed here in the last year that came out, which was really crazy popular, was that Fallout game, or Fall Guys, not Fallout.
Fall Guys.
Fall Guys. Mm-hmm. And so essentially you make up a character and you go into this thing and you try to race and run through the end, all these weird obstacles. And it pissed me off so much. You cannot invert your y-axis. There are a huge amount of players, right, who literally come from a pilot kind of mechanics and HUD kind of background. A lot of MMORPGs are built that way, to where, when I push forward on the remote, which is up on the control pad, I want to look down. And it's not just like shooting gallery console. So you kind of have to give both, right? Dead by Daylight does all that. Fall Guys did not, which is probably the reason why I didn't play it that long. Because it's so frustrating. Just like when I hand the controller to someone else afterwards and they're like, I need to change the access, it's messing me up. You kind of have to provide that. But on top of that, they have, Dead by Daylight, gotten a little bit of trouble a while ago because one of their developers was streaming on Twitch. And they basically were talking about, like, we know accessibility is a problem, the community keeps saying it, and basically it blew up over the web, right? And where people were just like, the developers don't even care that there's people that have different colorblind accessibility issues, and so they fast-tracked it based on the response that they got. So the Protanope and the Tritanope and the Deuteranope kind of visual colorblindness acuities, they are actually putting it into the next patch of the game, so you can actually see items that are highlighted with different visual colorblind kind of measures. And so I really like that fact that A, they're listening to their community through the forums, but then B, if the users are telling you, hey, this is something we want to see, maybe you should prioritize it. But in regards to that, I don't know many games that allow you to do that. I know that there's a couple different, you can control contrast and brightness and different color modes in games like Ghost of Tsushima. Yeah. But I think we're seeing more games that are now taking that into consideration, to where you just can't give people lightness or brightness meter. You're going to have to kind of give them different things. And if you're not giving them, Rumble capabilities, captions, rumble cues to replace audio cues, different things for different visual acuities or color blindness. So that's one of the things that I really liked, I guess, about that sticks out to me for Dead by Daylight. The other thing is the piece that's on there is that credibility.
Oh, yeah.
And so, if we start thinking about online playing and battling one another, and you're going into like a MOBA, matching people of similar skill levels, as well as, making sure that it's democratic and fair. We've talked in the past before about, hey, I can just go on World of Warcraft, mine a bunch of gold, and then sell it and email it to another person so they don't have to get gold. And you can do that. That's something that's in a lot of MMORPGs, to where you can't really, if I can contact another player and send another player something in the game, how are you limiting gold? And then, like, who do you know in another country who's just farming kind of World of Warcraft currency? And I'm saying World of Warcraft, I'm not saying that they do this, but I mean an MMORPG currency and then selling it for real world cash. And you can't do anything like that in Dead by Daylight. There is no transferring of currency, or the three currencies that it has, which are built on experience, you have to buy yourself or you have to earn it. So it's that model of you can get everything, but you have to play the crap out of it, or you can use microtransactions to get costume pieces if you want. But the gameplay is the same. There is no advantage to any person for having cash.
That's huge. Yeah, that credibility aspect around microtransactions, I think, surfaces a lot. I don't think folks use that language, credibility. But I think it's a big part. And it comes down to, frankly, like, do you trust when a user or when a developer says that it's not play to win, or pay to win, excuse me? Do you trust them or don't you? And I think there's a lot of cases where it really is advantageous to spend money on the game. Although I do think that, purely anecdotally, that the at least when we're talking about like AA and AAA games, that the tide is changing here, and a lot of the microtransactions go to avatar customization and stuff like that. But I still think it's like when we're talking about mobile games, we're definitely talking about pay to win.
I would say mobile games. Yeah, mobile games are definitely the exception there, because I was just checking out Nintendo's Dr. Mario, which Nintendo has a couple cool apps, right? Like for Android and iPhones, and Mario Kart and Super Mario Run, and kind of teamed up with Niantic for Pokemon Go. But for Dr. Mario, it has that timer feature, right? Which basically says that, hey, at some point you're going to have to, you can't retry, or you ran out of hearts that you have today to try to cure more viruses or to proceed on the map. And you're going to have to wait 15 minutes. But if you don't want to wait 15 minutes, you can buy hearts, So it's one of those things. But then also the things you can buy are these things to use inside of like the Tetris-like pill level with the viruses with Dr. Mario to make more things blow up and get rid of more lines. So in that regards, it's kind of like, well, you are paying to like get better, to do better at the game.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's other games that are just like Candy Crush or like that, because Pokemon Go is definitely like that. It's just hey man, if you are not near a post office or a library or a statue or something of significance, you're not going to be able to harvest items like every couple minutes from these places, these check-ins. So you have to buy them if you're... Yeah,
and I think you can speed up your like egg maturation, I think, with raw dollars.
Yeah, so that's definitely mobile is, I would say, the ka-ching there. But I would agree with you. Apart from mobile, in most other games, it's the incentive is more for like you said, like Fortnite. It's like, I want to look like John Wick or a Ninja Turtle, or I want to look like like I want specific clothes, and that's what you're paying for. But it doesn't give you advantage in the game. It's still a level playing field.
Credibility was one of those facets that really interests me, because I don't think there are a lot of game reviewers who focus on that specifically. but it comes up.
So we talked about a little bit about we talked about accessibility, credibility, and ethical pieces in here. But I guess I want to hear from you a little bit more about, the usefulness and the findability and the fun or the desirability of Sinuous Sacrifice, if that's the one that you're nominating.
I am, but so usefulness. I am nominating Sinuous Sacrifice, but now that we've gone on this tangent of naming a dozen other games, I'm going to name another. I struggled with, if usefulness is utility plus usability, I struggled finding a game, and I want to nominate to think about it in terms of its utility is this indie game. I'm curious if you played it or heard of it, called That Dragon Cancer.
No, I've not heard of it.
So this is a game that was created by a really small team, and it is effectively an autobiographical experience where the developers, their son was diagnosed with terminal cancer at I think about a year old, and it gave him only a really short time to live. He survived for 4 years and then died. So they put together this game to tell the emotional side of that story. You have different puzzles, and you navigate from one room to the next, and playgrounds that morph into hospital rooms, and there's always, this kind of like child's laughter somewhere like over the horizon. And it is extremely sad. Like when I finished the game, like I cried. It was like that hard. I'm getting choked up like thinking about it. But I'm trying to think of a game in terms of its utility. Is it fun? No. Like absolutely not. It's not fun. This is not a fun game. To me, its chief value is that it either provides an artful outlet for folks who have experienced like cancer-based death in the family or illness-based death, and provides some kind of like outlet, or it provides this kind of educational mapping. It creates neurons that weren't there before to effectively develop a person's empathy. It is a piece of training. It's a piece of emotional training. To the point to think about this in terms of like Morville's or our Honeycomb here, no one would disagree that this is a net positive user experience and is an incredibly sad experience, which I think is really interesting to conflate. That like a good UX has nothing to do with delight, right? The delight is ancillary. It is a byproduct, but it is not required for good UX.
Yeah, like delight or graphics or mapping controls, like you said.
Or fun.
Yeah, it reminds me. Have you ever played the other indie game, What Remains of Edith Finch?
Yeah, I started it. I've never finished it, but yeah, I have it.
It's very similar to where like you're literally walking down your family history, and that is your family is kind of, there's a curse on your family that everyone dies mysteriously or goes missing or something bad happens to, and so you're kind of the youngest member of this family repiecing together your past because it was unknown to you, and you're just kind of unfolding all of these kind of tragic stories of your life, right? Of your relatives that you didn't know. Mm-hmm. And it really just makes, the mother, Edith Finch of the family, or, like how horrible or painful her life was and why she lived the way she did. That was kind of in this, on the outskirts of civilization, like in a weird house that was also part of a tree that also had like weird rooms and different things because of the way that you kind of uncover this history. And I would say it's definitely not like when we talk about desirable meaning or equating to fun, it doesn't always have to be fun. Desirable can also be as it relates mechanically to well, what's it doing for you as the player?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it can be somber. It can be a narrative experience. It can make you feel and think. So I think, no, that's a good thought. You don't get that in blockbuster games or
You really
AA or
don't.
AAA games, right? And that's why there is such a huge market for indie games. And even in this, I don't know if it's a AA or AAA game. I don't think it is, but Heavy Rain. Have you heard of that game?
Oh, I have. And as a non-PlayStation owner, I'm so sad that I've never played it.
Yeah, I think it's actually out for.
Is it on
like,
Steam, maybe? Yeah.
I think you can get it on Steam in addition to PlayStation.
It's on Windows now. Yeah.
Yeah, so, but essentially, it is a choice given. It's very much like Detroit Being Human, or
that's one I want to play too.
Two Souls, or any game to where it's just a story that you're making choices through. But in that regards, Heavy Rain is you're controlling the character from different characters from different perspectives. A father who's a single father, a detective, and this woman, and then essentially it's painful because you're tracking down a serial killer who's captured this single father's son, who this woman is reporting, investigating, and this detective is hoping to find. And but what happens, and I'm not going to ruin it, but essentially what unfolds is you find out through the course of the game why the serial killer is doing what he's doing. And you can't help but empathize. And then that, much like Detroit Being Human, you going through that process and learning to empathize with, why this is so tragic, why, like Detroit Being Human, like why we can't treat artificial life like this.
Yeah.
It affects you change as a player, right? And then at the end of the game, your choices are going to be different. You're not the same person when you get to the end of the game, right? You're not going to be like, oh, destroy all, Skynet, destroy all artificial intelligence. And you're not going to be saying like, oh, he's a serial killer, kill him. You're actually going to change the outcome of the game based on what you experienced by playing the game.
Playing games with a knowledge of these kind of, design thinking constructs is that you can appreciate them in their different facets, right? The honeycomb is effectively a kaleidoscope, right? Look at a game through any particular lens, any particular facet.
Yeah, I think by his definition of known, like, Peter Morville, this is literally a tool. It's a different way of seeing. It's, to your point, it's these different facets. They speak to emotional needs, design needs, business needs, player interaction, but it's a way to kind of start looking at how we look at games, experience them, transform what we're seeing, or lets us look or explore a little bit beyond, what's there. And there's all types of games, and there's all types of players.
For real, man. Buzz.
Thank you for listening to the Design Thinking Games podcast. To connect with your hosts, Michael or Tim, please go to designthinkinggames.com, where you can request topics, ask questions, or see what else is going on. Until next time, game on.